Hello again.
Long time no see.
I know. Minutes have passed since the last episode. We got rid of Rick. Poor Rick. Dad, gone.
I still prefer Dadrick.
Dadrick. I don't know when this episode is going to come out. So maybe we haven't introduced Dadrick yet.
People aren't going to get that joke.
No. Anyway, Ryan, last December, we crossed the river to Olympia.
Mm-hmm.
And we did a special, What is a Cruiser?
Mm-hmm.
Now, that might seem like an obvious question because, you can define cruisers by certain features, but that turned out to be a little more of an interesting question than maybe the average person would have thought. And a lot of people have their opinions and everything. So I wanted to ask the same question again today, but to everyone's favorite battleship curator.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What is a battleship?
An aircraft carrier. Yeah.
Well, an aircraft carrier is just a modified cruiser. We covered that in the cruiser episode. Okay? Click the button. Actually, don't. Watch this first, then go back. So Ryan is going to give his professional opinion about what a battleship is right after the intro. Are you ready to discuss what a battleship is?
Is the seance started already?
I don't know.
Are we defining battleship across all of history? Or are we confining it to a specific time period? Like pre-dreadnoughts and...
So that is an excellent first question.
Can I just tell you what isn't a battleship?
I suppose you could. For the sake of this argument, I want to look at World War II battleships.
Okay.
Because that's the time period where you think it should be the most obvious.
They've had the longest time to develop. They're at their apex.
But even still, though, there's a lot of gray area. Maybe. Okay. Well, let's hear what Ryan Szimanski's definition of a battleship is.
Hey! Mercurius is one of the volunteers here.
Mm-hmm.
It's been volunteering for at least a year now, I'd say.
Oh, good. It's always good to see, people, free labor. All right. You've been distracted long enough. Battleship.
Battleships.
So, obviously, a lot of people and a lot of treaties would classify battleships by weight, tonnage, whether that's just putting a definition on it or trying to limit it to a certain tonnage, like 30,000. And then I think a lot of people want to classify battleships by gun caliber.
Yeah.
And then
that's appropriate.
Obviously, once we get to Dreadnought, obviously the idea of a battleship in terms of its layout and maybe its secondary battery and everything, we start to get this clearer picture. Whereas a lot of the pre-dreadnoughts, it's all over the place. Insert picture of French pre-dreadnought battleship.
And I do think the definition of a pre-dreadnought battleship should be kept separate from the definition of a say modern or late era battleship.
So I asked this question because we do get this a lot. And I see in comments, and this goes back to the original episodes that we did, like all the way back to episode 1, which was the Alaska episode, which...
I had no idea that Alaska would come up in this episode.
Oh, no, because we don't do that on purpose. Alaska being a large cruiser, that is a ship the size of a battleship.
Yeah, more than 30,000 tons. She's almost the size of a treaty battleship. 12-inch guns. By most definitions, 12-inch guns is battleship caliber.
Well, so that's one of the points that I wanted to make.
Mhm.
Everyone, and Paul Stillwell, who will be here tomorrow,
Mhm.
maintains the idea that Alaska is a battle cruiser because by World War II standards, 12-inch guns is a battleship caliber only because the battleship Arkansas still exists in the fleet, which the Navy has even designated an old battleship and making it like, what would you say, third class? Yeah. It's a piece of junk by World War II. There are cruisers that could obliterate Arkansas. It's barely good at shooting at short targets. So that's, but we do know that the gun performance on Alaska is similar to the gun performance on Texas, like the 14-inch.
Yeah,
guns.
14-inch 45 caliber, 14-inch 50 caliber guns have very similar performance to the 12-inch, I think 12-inch 50 caliber guns on Alaska, especially with Alaska's super heavy shells.
Yeah, like that was an incredible gun that was manufactured for that one class that was never used.
Yeah.
Really. So that was my whole premise to this.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a ship which is above 30,000 tons, which again, the various naval treaties tried to limit battleships to, and you have a ship that is of that size and of a certain speed and everything, but we don't want to call Alaska a battleship, a battle cruiser. And obviously we're not going to call Alaska a battleship because it doesn't have the armor. And I would actually go forward and say, well, Alaska is still not a battle cruiser because it still doesn't have the armor.
Yeah, really cruiser scale armor, even less than a battle cruiser. Yeah,
exactly. So with that being said, is Battleship really just armor belt by World War II? Because you have this ship as an example. This armor belt is basically just South Dakota's, right?
Yeah.
Your favorite term? What was it? Hammers, eggshells. What is it?
Yeah. World War II battleships are just eggshell swinging hammers at each other.
All right. So with that all in mind, Ryan Szimanski, what is a battleship?
I really don't think that speed needs to be a part of the definition.
Okay.
Battleships they have to be self-propelled gun platforms, but it doesn't really matter if it's doing 18 knots or 33 knots. I feel like that helps you classify subcategories of battleships. Is it a fast battleship or whatnot? So really that leaves us with armor and firepower. And battleships have to have both of those things to a greater degree than any other ship in the fleet.
Obviously, the ship is a platform for the gun. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
And generally, gun size is what dictates tonnage. That's why Yamato is so big.
Yeah, because your gun size is going to dictate how much armor you need to protect your ship from that size gun.
Not in this case.
The super heavy shells kind of throws that out the window, but the armor scheme was designed prior to the super heavy shell.
Okay. Oh, no, okay. So Sodex also had 45 caliber guns too.
Yeah.
So lighter shells, less velocity.
Well,
maybe.
They're firing the same shells. It is less velocity, which actually makes them more deadly to a ship like this because they're more likely to strike the less armored deck than the more armored belt.
There you go. But generally, the bigger the gun, the heavier the ship.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's a pretty fair statement.
Okay. But then but then by the end of World War II, we do run into these situations where, or even, not even before the end of World War II, pocket battleships. In the cruiser episode, we talked about propaganda, the difference that, like, for instance, like China calls certain ships cruisers when they're really destroyers. Ticonderogas and Arleigh Burkes share the same relative hull form, but one's a cruiser, right?
Yeah, I mean, Ticonderogas are built on a Spruance hull form. The Spruances were destroyers. Nobody argued that.
So is naming so naming of cruisers and destroyers seems to be kind of out the window.
I would say on the other end of the spectrum, the line between smaller destroyers and frigates is really blurred as well.
Well, and I think in the cruiser episode, we said that frigates, the size of ship nowadays that would be a frigate would be like would be a destroyer, considering destroyers are the size of heavy cruisers.
Yeah, a 10,000 ton Arleigh Burke.
Right. So, but then if you rewind back to 10,000 ton pocket battleships like Graf Spee, the term pocket battleship, it's an armored cruiser.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the super cruiser before super cruisers existed.
It is very much, if armored cruisers had not grown into battle cruisers and had continued on, that's what they would end up as.
Another fun what is it question is Scharnhorst, which we did a whole follow-up episode to the Alaska episode where we talked about some of the various designs of other nations, and that, well, Scharnhorst is a battleship.
Yeah.
She's a little slim, a little thin, she's got that hull form, but very much a battleship armor belt.
Oh, yeah.
But she's got those 11-inch guns.
In fact, I think her armor belt is thicker than Bismarck's armor belt. Bismarck's total armor scheme is better.
Right, but just the thickness of the main belt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is like point something of an inch thicker than Bismarck.
Yeah, it's crazy. And that's why I every time you see Scharnhorst as a battle cruiser, like I don't buy that. But she has those 11-inch guns. Now, granted, that whole class was treaty crippled.
Yeah,
there's a word. And so you end up trying to play nice, and you end up with that sort of gun caliber.
And people may say that, oh yeah, they could have swapped those 11-inch turrets out for twin 15-inch turrets. But I would still say that leaves you a turret short of where you would want to be for a battleship.
Yeah. So then, and then that brings us to, yes. So, but then that brings us to the O class of battle cruisers, which were, I think, the 15-inch equipped sort of large capital ship that really did bridge the gap between cruiser. But for World War II purposes, you do have all these nations that go to war with all these different size and all these different battleships. I mean, look at KGV, lighter 14-inch guns. That design wasn't necessarily that great. Obviously, the North Carolinas start out kind of going that direction, but then end up as 16s. You have older U.S. battleships, which are still 16 and 14 equipped, but they're obviously smaller. And then all of the European ships generally that all went 15-inch guns, like the Italians and the Germans and some of the the Brits still. And then of course you have these ships, and then of course Yamato, and then obviously the ships that were canceled, like Montana and everything. And I think you'd see and here's the hypothetical, and maybe it would be obvious if the naval treaties didn't happen, and the countries like Germany and Great Britain and the United States, Japan, whatever, were allowed to build the big ship designs.
Okay,
that were canceled and they didn't get to, because I think we mentioned before, Japan goes from Nagato and Mutsu to Yamato. They just skipped over like the last 6 chapters and went all the way to the end. So would New Jersey be, man, and we're just digging up all the receipts here. Would New Jersey be as much of the top tier battleship as we like to think it is, when you have maybe even some of these greater designs? If you had the Super Yamato, if you had like an 18-inch equipped Montana hull, or even something that was even more developed than a Montana. World of Warships came out with like the Super US battleship. So like the super ship line. So like Germany, their super battleship is like H-42 or whatever.
Okay,
the massive, like, I think 17.5 inch or 19, I can't remember. But so in World of Warships, the U.S. super battleship is like this continuation of the Montana, and it's got sort of like the King Nimitz like pyramid superstructure and all that, and
I do like that look.
And it's 4x4, 16.
Huh. Interesting.
Right. It's wild. And is that really just it at the end of the day? Is that what defines battleships? Is it the combination of the armor and the guns?
Yeah, I think that's very important. The Iowa class was never intended to be the end-all be-all of battleship design for the U.S. They're really a design aberration in what they're highlighting in speed as over armor. It just happened to be the last and largest class completed. If Montana had been completed, if any of the other super ships had been completed, there's no way we would think as highly of these ships. Even if they did not have the service life that they had, so a lot of the positive opinions we have about these ships are because they came back in the 50s, the 60s, the 80s, when there weren't other battleships around.
As that propaganda piece.
Yeah, exactly. So that really leads into us thinking of these as super ships. So yeah, if they have a shorter service life, if there's a bigger one built in this country, then I don't think they are the end-all be-all at all. Heck, even if Yamato survives World War II and the Japanese continue to use her in their navy into the 60s or 70s or whatever, I don't think you hear nearly as much about the Iowa class. So, or likewise, if Bismarck survives or and is continuously used.
So, and then we can talk about post-war. And one of the ships I love talking about is Salem. Obviously, as a museum ship, we've talked about it, but those immediate post-war gun cruisers, and of course, maybe you can lump Alaska, but Alaska is a pre-war design, though. And we just talk about the level of firepower that an automatic weapon system like Des Moines is able to deliver.
And if you do the math, the weight of 8-inch shells that she can throw in a period of time is roughly equivalent, like very, very close to the weight of shells that an Iowa class can theoretically throw in that time period.
And so if this ship isn't necessarily armed against its own shells, then why would if this ship can't withstand battleship shells to a certain extent?
See, I don't love that argument because she is armored against the 16-inch shells that were there when the armor was designed.
Okay.
So, and it's the same basic size shell as the British are throwing or the Japanese are throwing that they're expecting to hit. You only armor your ship against your own size guns because you don't know what the size of the other guy's guns are and like how effective they are, what their performance is to the same level.
I guess, well, everyone wants to put this ship up against Yamato. And we made, I think, the claim in a previous episode that Yamato shells probably would have. It's not like hot knife through butter bad, but it's definitely a lot more damage would have been taken than you probably would have estimated.
Yamato shells defeat our armor a higher percentage of times than our shells defeat Yamato armor.
So with that being said, does that mean by the end of World War II, armor is basically irrelevant? Like no armor is best armor, over penetrations for the win?
I do not believe that.
Okay.
I think that good battleships are still well armored. They are just not able to outright resist all threats. They're just mitigating them.
So when we said if you were to recommission New Jersey and put it back out there today, the idea that it could probably resist a lot of the cruise missiles by armor thickness, but you would mission kill it. In the same way that 400 and 40, 50 plus British shells mission killed Bismarck.
Yeah, exactly. You take out all Bismarck's turrets, she's no good. You hit us with missiles in the superstructure, and we lose a lot of our command and control capabilities, our radios, and our radars. Well, we can't retaliate with our missiles at that point. It's the same as taking out Bismarck's guns. Are we ever going to get into range to use our guns? Our guns aren't going to be taken out by a cruise missile, but are we going to get within 23 miles of the enemy to drop a shell on them? Probably not.
So given what we know about battleships, what does the battleship of the future look like? Do you even think that name, that class, given the fact that we interchange destroyer and cruiser and everything, does any country ever build a capital ship again? Now, no battleship in the future is going to be gun based. This is a relic, don't you think? For the very reasons, unless they're like laser weapons or something.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. Not knowing what new technologies will be developed. If like a super efficient railgun is developed, and now this is so much cheaper than slinging missiles, maybe we do see a return to guns. If like a really effective laser is developed and put in turrets, then maybe we do see a turret armed warship again.
Well, because the laser weapons nowadays, I mean, so the ship would have to be nuclear powered, which is fair. They're having problems with the
having enough power
power generation on board conventionally powered ships, whereas the carriers and their reactors, in theory, have enough sort of power generation capability to power laser weapons. But do you think the battleship really did end at the end of World War II? Maybe even based on that definition?
Ooh. See, conventional wisdom sure seems to point to that. But ships grow larger and larger over time. I would not be surprised if we don't see somebody a decade, 2 decades, 5 decades, or whatever, building a surface warship, capital warship, similar in use to a battleship, that's an order of magnitude larger than the other ships around it. The U.S. Navy tends to trend more towards distributed lethality. Why bring one battleship that can be mission killed when you can bring 3 Arleigh Burke destroyers for the same tonnage, and you lose one of them.
Well, and then crews and everything else. All the problems with actually getting new sailors.
Oh yeah. You could man 4 or 5 Arleigh Burkes with the crew of an Iowa class battleship. The 80s crew, where it's at its smallest, not to mention the World War II crew, you can man like 7 or 8.
Right. So if speed is not, so you're cutting speed out of the definition.
I really don't think it's important for a battleship. I think that it is important for battle cruisers. They have to hit a minimum speed. But battleships can be the same speed as battle cruisers. They can be drastically slower than all of their surface combatants.
I don't like the term fast battleship. I think it's like by World War II, all battleships are fast. And if they're not, then you're kind of just a bigger target.
Yeah, I see fast battleship as more of a generation thing than this ship hits the speed threshold.
Sure.
It's like you've got pre-dreadnoughts and dreadnoughts and super dreadnoughts, and then fast battleships or treaty battleships. Those terms are sort of interchangeable.
Yeah, and then you just kind of run out the clock, and then we're over. Versus like the smaller navies, who you can only afford to build a few battleships, and then so the generations are more are pretty cut and or a little obvious, I guess you could say. Again, like the Japanese going from Nagato straight to Yamato. And the Nagato was pretty fast.
Yeah.
For what it was.
Brand new, like 26 knots. I'd argue she was the best warship in the world during the interwar period when you look at the combination of speed, firepower, and armor.
But then certainly compared to like the standard, like the older Americans, with the same, 8 16-inch guns, and in terms of the protection and their speed being pretty awful before Pearl Harbor, and then really just downright
not getting any better.
Yeah, just terrible after.
It's funny how they don't get any faster as they get older and heavier. Weird.
Yeah, and as you make them just wider and fatter. Yeah. You know how on those standard class battleships, you know how they bolted on, the gigantic sections of hull, but then they stacked all the 5-inch 38s.
Yeah.
Along. Well, those 5-inch 38s are mounted like right up, like practically like on the side of the ship.
Yeah, pretty well. Yeah.
That's not armored though, because like they would all the armored spaces would have been on the inside.
Yeah, that's where the magazines are.
Well, but I'm saying those 5-inch 38s right there along this gigantic slab side seem to be one small caliber shell away from just not working anymore. But I guess that's the idea of those older battleships. They're not supposed to be frontline units.
Yeah.
Unless, Sarah got straighter.
Well, but who cares about protecting the 5-inch guns? You've got 16 of them.
Yeah. Well,
there.
No,
they're the secondary battery. You are about delivering the large caliber ordnance.
Okay. Well, I just meant from a design standpoint, it seems kind of silly. It just seems like that's just asking to be like knocked out.
Yeah. Battleships designed with that weapon system from the keel up don't necessarily have them that close to the edge of the ship.
Right. Well, and then that's my biggest beef with internal versus external armor belts as well. Is this idea that you can shoot all these external tanks full of holes.
Yeah.
And okay, well now all my water is gone and all my fuel is leaking out, and you haven't penetrated the armor, but you've messed up the ship's fighting capability. Anyway, that's another argument.
Well, I mean, likewise with Bismarck, she doesn't have enough reserve of buoyancy, so you might not ever penetrate her turtle deck, but him. That is a good correction.
Before the Kriegaboos. That's his armor.
Yeah, no, you can shoot up the part that isn't armored by that and sink him by reducing the reserve of buoyancy. So even though that is an external belt and whatnot, you got very similar issues. Yamato, you can't shoot up with small caliber guns and sink her.
No. So getting back to Salem, just keep making all these left and right turns and away from the actual. Is a ship like a Des Moines class heavy cruiser? Is that by 1947? Is that a battleship?
No way.
No. I mean, it's a cruiser. I mean, it's 8-inch guns.
Yeah, she doesn't have the guns. She can throw a lot of weight, but she doesn't have guns that can go as far, penetrate as much. She doesn't have the protection, the survivability.
Sure.
She arguably doesn't even have like the anti-aircraft ability that a full-size battleship can throw up. Now, obviously, she has some more modern systems that are really effective. Her 8-inch guns may have even shot down a jet. Or Newport News' 8-inch guns, the sister ship's 8-inch guns might have even shot down a jet aircraft during the Vietnam War. So like that's real effective anti-aircraft battery. But you put the updated AA guns on an Iowa class battleship like they had one of the designs to do and never got the funding for. Yeah. And it's an order of magnitude larger. And then she doesn't have the size, the displacement, the capacity for growth, any of that stuff.
That's fair. So it really does. So now it sounds like it's a size and armor definition. Because we also once talked about the World of Warships version of Illinois, which is that Des Moines equipped. So in terms of like 3-inch 50s, 5-inch 54s, and then the 8-inch Mark 16 and quadruple turrets, but on an Iowa hull. So you have all this cruiser firepower, as you just said, that didn't make it a battleship, but it's still an Iowa hull. Yeah. So it's definitely a battleship, right?
No, I wouldn't call that a battleship.
No. So what is the definition?
Okay. You have to have a certain size, right? That size very much varies throughout the design history of battleships. A 10,000-ton pre-dreadnought, a 25,000-ton dreadnought, and a 45,000-ton super battleship are very different things. It definitely has to have guns of a certain caliber and a certain number of them. And it has to have heavy protection.
Well, wouldn't an 8-inch equipped Illinois just be the Scharnhorst of the Iowa class? So battleship hull and like dinky cruiser guns. I'm sure not that the Mark 16 is a dinky cruiser gun.
I'm sure you're going to find some way to use this statement against me at some point in the future. But if you put Alaska's turrets on an Illinois hull, I think that makes Illinois a battleship. You put Des Moines turrets on an Illinois hull, and it does not make her a battleship. I'm not sure. It doesn't drop her down to a cruiser. I don't quite know what she is at that point.
Large cruiser.
It's not a large cruiser.
So it's a battle cruiser?
No, it's not a battle.
So what you're saying is we can't come up with a definition of a battleship? Because there's all these various... Because we, as we just said, called Scharnhorst a battleship because of the armor. So why does a Des Moines-equipped Illinois not follow that same?
Because it doesn't have capable enough guns. Those guns cannot duke it out with an enemy battleship.
Could Scharnhorst's 11-inch guns duke it out with an enemy battleship?
They have the penetration capability and the reload capability to be able to do serious damage to especially the older generation battleships. I remember she's one of the earlier generation of fast battleships or treaty battleships that's designed.
No, fair. Yeah.
So they're less looking at how is this going to compete with a North Carolina, Bismarck, a Yamato, and more looking at how is this going to compete with a Queen Elizabeth or a Julius Caesar or a French Bretagne or one of those.
Dunkirk,
whatever. Is around the same time period.
Sure. Yeah. Well, the Dunkirks, everyone wants to fall over and call them battle cruisers, and they had bigger guns than Scharnhorst.
Yeah, I want to put those in fast battleship as well. They've got 13-inch guns. They've got armor for those guns. They are pretty good size, but there's definitely a generational thing between the Scharnhorst and Dunkirks on the lower end of the modern fast battleship, and then the kind of standards, your King George V's, your South Dakotas, whatnot, and then the super ones like the Iowas and the Yamatos and the Bismarcks.
But does it work the other way? So you said if you put Alaska's guns on Illinois, that would make that a battleship because it has gun, as we discussed, gun performance of like a 14-inch or something like that. But does it work if you put now obviously if you put battleship guns on a cruiser, that traditionally makes it a battle cruiser, but by World War II standards, as we've talked, all the ships are fast, so that's one large component of a battle cruiser. So now to suddenly...
Battle cruisers don't have cruiser hulls, though. They have like capital ship style hulls.
Yeah, the British battle cruisers were bigger than...
They're battleships, and more expensive.
Yeah, look at Hood.
Hood's a fast battleship, not a battle cruiser.
That's my point. It's everything is fake. It's fake news. Everything is wrong. We know nothing.
You put an 11-inch gun on a cruiser hull, and you get Graf Spee, an armored cruiser type ship. You put a 12-inch gun on a cruiser hull, and you get the Alaskas. That's not battlecruiser capable?
Stalingrad. 12-inch gun with the Russians now. Okay, like you could take. So where's the secret documents? You know, those 12-inch guns were supposed to have some pretty great ballistics as well. That ship had Stalin was like, I want big guns with, he just went down the thing, and somehow, granted, the ship was never finished, but mathematically they seemed to have gotten it all done. But that ship actually was way better protected than like an Alaska. So if Alaska is that large cruiser, then something that like a Stalingrad, where it has the battle cruiser, or that maybe even where was it that Russia named all those big capital ships cruisers because they couldn't sail them past which strait? Was it Turkey?
Oh, the Bosphorus Strait, yeah. So between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean.
Okay.
The Montreux Convention in 1936 limited all types of things, coming through there.
I didn't know that. It had to be a cruiser or smaller?
Yeah. It's also why they called
their aviation cruisers.
Exactly.
Right.
I always wondered. Okay.
Yeah. So Stalingrad being a cruiser with these high-performing guns and this decent, like better than Alaska armor belt, still a cruiser, but again, for political reasons, it's a cruiser. But that is now marching into, especially in the post-war environment, when we're not really building this. And, countries like, Germany, Japan, no one's building traditional battleships.
Yeah.
So in a world where you can directly compare an Alaska class ship and a Stalingrad class ship, is Stalingrad the battleship of the post-war environment, even though it's a cruiser?
I would say that ships like Scharnhorst, the Japanese B-65, and Stalingrad are all more in the same category up there. And even though Alaska is really similar to all of them, she's just too cruiser-like to be in that, to occupy that same space.
Didn't B-65, though, wasn't that just like cruiser armor as well? I didn't think B-65 was any, like, I didn't think the armor was upgraded to actually make it like, versus just being like a standard jet. Obviously, Alaska-esque, where it was definitely better than a Mogami or something that was paper, something that could break it in half in a storm, or one of those. But I didn't think it was. I'd have to go back and look, but I don't think it's. I personally never thought it was. I wouldn't put B-65 and Stalingrad in the same category.
They definitely highlight different aspects of the firepower, speed, armor triangle. Yeah. But she's got more armor coverage, more torpedo defense, more of that sort of stuff than cruisers, even proportionally scaled up. Like Alaska is significantly bigger than a Des Moines or a Baltimore, but isn't proportionally better protected.
So, Ryan Szymanski, what is a battleship? Is it political? Do we not know? Is the answer, it depends? Which, if you're a marketing major, is a valid answer on a test. I'll raise my hand. It depends.
So we're specifically looking at World War II era ships. So I would say that it has to. I want a component of it to be have to do with what the country calls it.
Well, like the Germans calling Scharnhorst a battleship. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And there's some importance to Alaska being called a large cruiser and Scharnhorst being called a battleship.
Yeah.
But then it's not always true, like you were saying with Stalingrad being called a cruiser. She's definitely more than that.
Mm-hmm.
Hood is referred to as a battle cruiser throughout her whole life when she really is a fast battleship in armor and firepower and everything else.
Till Bismarck shows up.
There's no shame in being defeated by a ship 20 years newer than you,
Fair.
that in the same weight class.
Mhm.
Like that.
So, is it armor and gun caliber, and it's the relationship between the two is what gets you a battleship?
That is a large part of it.
Okay.
There are some other aspects of protection outside of armor,
Mhm.
like torpedo defense, compartmentalization, how much the armor covers.
Mhm.
And then size is definitely a part of it.
Mhm.
What is the weight and size of this ship?
Mhm. But not so. Just big ship, big guns, big armor equals big platform, obviously. But that doesn't mean you could put a 5-inch gun on a modern cruise ship and it wouldn't be a battleship just because
Right.
they weigh
It doesn't have big armor. It doesn't have
yeah.
big guns. It's
Right.
got the right size, displacement, length,
Right.
width, that sort of stuff.
So I guess we've talked now for however long it's been, and
About 5 minutes, I'd say.
yeah, 10 hours, and
1631.
oh yikes! And what you're saying is we've come to the same conclusion that everyone already knew. Like battleships are just big guns with big armor that are big, more, all of it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
That's my professional technical opinion.
And do we or do we not think? Now, I'm going to go out there and say that one day there will be a type of ship that will be worthy of the battleship name. And like you said, but I think it's going to have to be more than missiles. Like I think you can't weld 3 Arleigh Burkes together, have like a bunch of magazines, like missile magazines, and call it a battleship. Like you're going to have to really, from the keel up, think of a ship with.
Yeah, that couldn't be all that makes it a battleship. I could see an arsenal ship style, primarily missile-armed vessel fitting that category. But it has to be a certain order of magnitude larger than everything else. It has to have a certain level of protection more than an Arleigh Burke.
Right. So is Enterprise a battleship?
Which?
The one Captain Kirk is captain of, commands.
No, she's not an order of magnitude larger than other ships in the fleet. I think she's more cruiser sized, and there are like larger starships out there that would have more firepower protection.
Star Cruiser, I think.
Star Cruiser?
A battle cruiser, but
I'm more of a Battlestar guy than a Star Trek guy.
Carriers are cruisers, so therefore Starship Enterprise being a cruiser would make sense.
Does she carry aircraft?
No,
Or whatever the space fighter?
possibly. We're wasting the ladies and gentlemen's time. Actually, it's mostly gentlemen. There's only 3 ladies who watch this channel.
We're up to 3?
We're up to 3. Okay, with that being said, what is a battleship? I think we've heard from you. So big guns, big armor, big speed. All right. Anything else?
No big speed, big hull.
Big hull, big guns. Speed optional.
Armor not optional.
Armor not optional, but gun caliber. Big.
The biggest.
consideration.
Political considerations.
That's definitely some of it.
Some of it, all of it, most of it. Ronald Reagan, all of it. Right?
If Ronald Reagan calls a ship a battleship, then I guess that's what
No,
it is.
I mean, like, that's why we brought him back. Politics. Right? Maybe?
Well, yeah.
Just a little bit?
Yeah,
Okay.
pretty much.
All right. We're rambling. Thank you. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. Tell us what jackasses we are. I'll bleep that out. Maybe not. My grandmother watches this episode.
Oh, one of the three women.
Yeah, one of the three women. All right. Thank you, everyone. We're out.